Veltar adjusted his observation equipment and settled into his chair aboard the Corvani research vessel. The ship hung in space like a silent predator, its advanced stealth systems keeping it hidden from both sides of the coming conflict. As the galaxy's most experienced military analyst, Veltar had witnessed 17 different species go to war. He knew how these things ended. The humans were about to learn a harsh lesson. Through his viewing screen, Veltar could see the human colony of new souls spinning slowly in the darkness. It looked peaceful from this distance, with its glowing cities and orbital stations. The humans had no idea what was coming for them. In 3 hours, the hegemony fleet would arrive and show these newcomers how real wars were fought. Veltar pulled up his files on humanity. They had discovered space travel only 200 years ago. Babies in galactic terms. Their military technology was primitive compared to established powers like his own Corvani Empire. Their ships were slow and clumsy. Their weapons were basic energy projectors that most species had abandoned centuries ago. The hegemony had chosen well for their first test of human resolve. They were a mid-level aggressive species with a simple but effective strategy. They would arrive in overwhelming numbers, destroy key infrastructure, and demand surrender. When the humans refused, they would target civilian areas until capitulation became inevitable. It worked on 17 previous species. It would work on the humans too. A soft chime indicated incoming ships. Veltar activated his long-range sensors and watched the hegemony fleet emerge from hyperspace. 200 vessels of various sizes, all bristling with weapons. The humans had maybe 30 ships in the entire system, most of them civilian transports. The hegemony formation was textbook, perfect. Heavy cruisers in the center, destroyers forming a screening line, and fast attack craft ready to exploit any weakness. Veltar made notes on his datapad. This would be over quickly. On the human communication channels, chaos erupted. Veltar listened to their panicked voices as colony administrators tried to coordinate evacuation procedures. Their military commander, someone called Captain Lee Dong-yun, was shouting orders that made little sense. The humans were running around, like insects whose nest had been kicked. The hegemony admiral sent the standard ultimatum: surrender immediately or face total destruction. Veltar had heard similar messages before. The wording was always the same, designed to create maximum psychological pressure. Captain Lee Dong-yun's response surprised Veltar. Instead of begging for negotiation or demanding terms, the human simply said, "Negative. We decline your offer." Veltar frowned. That was not the expected response. Most species at least tried to buy time with diplomatic talk. The human seemed almost casual about rejecting superior force. The hegemony fleet moved forward and the human ships began to scatter. Veltar nodded approvingly. Finally, some sense from the humans. They were fleeing rather than attempting a suicidal defense. Their ships were heading for the outer system, probably hoping to escape to hyperspace. But something felt wrong. Veltar enhanced his sensor readings and studied the human movement patterns more carefully. They were not fleeing randomly. Each ship was moving to a specific coordinate, and their timing was too precise for panic. This looked almost like a planned maneuver. The evacuation of New Sol was proceeding faster than Veltar expected. Massive transport ships were lifting off from the surface, packed with civilians. But again, something seemed off. The transports were not just carrying people. Veltar's sensors detected heavy industrial equipment being loaded as well. Why would refugees take factory machinery? On the ground, Colonel Park Ji-won was coordinating the evacuation with military precision. Her troops were not just protecting civilians, they were systematically dismantling key infrastructure and loading it onto the transports. Power generators, communication arrays, even entire computer systems were being carefully removed and packed away. Veltar made more notes. This level of organization suggested advanced planning. The humans had prepared for this attack. But how? Intelligence indicated they had no warning of the hegemony's intentions. The first engagement began as the hegemony fleet caught up with the fleeing human ships. Veltar expected to see a quick massacre. Instead, he witnessed something puzzling. The human ships did not try to fight or continue running. They simply stopped and allowed themselves to be captured. But as soon as hegemony boarding parties entered the human vessels, explosions began erupting throughout the ships. The humans had booby-trapped their own fleet, not with enough force to destroy the hegemony ships, but enough to disable them and kill the boarding parties. Veltar sat up straighter in his chair. That was not standard military doctrine. Most species would try to preserve their ships for future use, even in defeat. The humans had destroyed their own fleet just to eliminate a few dozen enemy soldiers. The hegemony admiral was clearly frustrated. His perfect battle plan had captured nothing but wreckage. The human fleet was gone, the planet was nearly evacuated, and he had lost several boarding teams. But he still had overwhelming firepower advantage. He ordered his ships to bombardment positions around New Seoul. Captain Lee Dong-yun broadcast a message from somewhere in the outer system. You can have the dirt if you want it. We will remember what you do here. Veltar replayed those words several times. They carried an undertone he had never heard from a defeated species before. Not despair or anger, but something that sounded almost like a promise. The bombardment of New Seoul lasted 6 hours. The hegemony fleet systematically destroyed every city, industrial facility, and piece of infrastructure on the planet. When they finished, the once green world was a smoking ruin. But Veltar noticed something disturbing in the aftermath. The human evacuation had been almost perfectly efficient. His calculations suggested that over 90% of the population had escaped, along with most of their industrial capacity. The hegemony had captured an empty shell. More troubling was the human response to the destruction of their colony. Instead of demanding negotiation or offering surrender, Captain Lee Dong-yun sent a simple message to the hegemony fleet. "Thank you for the demonstration. We understand now." Veltar did not understand what the humans meant, but something about their tone made him uneasy. In all his years of observing warfare, he had never heard a species thank their attackers. The hegemony fleet moved on to the next human colony, confident that word of New Seoul's fate would break human resistance. They expected to find frightened humans ready to surrender. Instead, they found empty space. The colony had been completely evacuated. Every human, every piece of equipment, every scrap of useful material was gone. All that remained was an automated beacon broadcasting a message. "You are welcome to the rocks." Veltar began to feel the first stirrings of doubt about his understanding of human psychology. This was not how defeated species behaved. Where was the desperation? Where were the pleas for mercy? The humans were acting as if losing their colonies was part of some larger plan. In the outer system, the human fleet was regrouping. Not the ships that had been destroyed, but new vessels emerging from hidden bases. Veltar's sensors detected at least 50 ships that had not appeared in any previous intelligence reports. The humans had been hiding significant military assets. Captain Lee Dong-yun opened communications with all human forces throughout the system. His voice was calm and professional as he spoke. All units, this is command. The enemy has shown us their capabilities and intentions. Protocol 7 is now in effect. We are no longer bound by peacetime restrictions. Veltar had never heard of Protocol 7, but something about the way Lee Dong-yun said it made his scales itch with unease. Around him, his Corvani crew members were shifting nervously. They could feel it too. Something had changed in the humans. The real war was about to begin. The hegemony Admiral Kravex studied the tactical display with growing frustration. 3 human colonies captured, and he had nothing to show for it except empty planets and damaged ships. This was not how invasions were supposed to proceed. Veltar watched from his hidden observation post as Kravex implemented the standard hegemony intimidation protocol. Captured human civilians were being broadcast across all communication channels, demanding that the remaining human forces surrender or watch their people suffer. It was a tactic that had broken the will of 17 species. The human response was immediate and completely unexpected. Captain Lee Dong-yun's voice came across all frequencies, calm and clear. "Attention, hegemony forces. We see you have taken prisoners. We understand you believe this gives you leverage over us. You are mistaken." Veltar leaned forward in his chair. This was not the desperate pleading he expected from a species watching their civilians being threatened. Lee Dong-yun continued. "Every human in this system volunteered for military service the moment you attacked our colonies. This includes the civilians you have captured. They knew the risks. They accept them. We will not negotiate for their release." Admiral Kravex's confusion was visible even on Veltar's long-range sensors. The hegemony commander was sending increasingly frantic demands for surrender, threatening worse treatment of the prisoners. The humans simply acknowledged each transmission and continued with their own activities. Colonel Park Ji-won was coordinating something in the asteroid belt between the 4th and 5th planets. Veltar enhanced his sensors to get a better look at what the humans were doing out there. What he saw made no sense according to standard military doctrine. The humans were building something, not defensive fortifications or weapon platforms, but what appeared to be industrial facilities. While their people were being held hostage and their colonies burned, the humans were setting up manufacturing plants in empty space. Veltar ran the tactical situation through his computer models. Every simulation showed the same result. The humans should surrender. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and their civilians were in enemy hands. Continuing to fight served no logical purpose. But logic seemed to be something the humans ignored. Lieutenant Kim Tae-hyung led a small human force in an attack on one of the captured colonies. Veltar expected to see a standard rescue operation. Fast insertion. Grab the prisoners. Quick withdrawal. Instead, Kim Tae-hyung's unit did something that violated every principle of hostage rescue Veltar knew. They attacked the hegemony occupation force directly. The assault was not designed to rescue the human prisoners. It was designed to kill as many hegemony soldiers as possible. Kim Tae-hyung's troops used weapons and tactics that Veltar had never seen before. They fought from inside buildings, emerged from sewers, and seemed to appear and disappear at will. When Admiral Kravex threatened to execute human prisoners in retaliation, Kim Tae-hyung's response was broadcast for all to hear. "Execute them if you want. We will remember. And we will make you pay for each one." Veltar felt his blood chill at the casual way the human said those words. This was not bravado or desperate defiance. It was a simple statement of fact, delivered with the same tone someone might use to discuss the weather. The fighting on the colony surface continued for 6 hours. When it ended, over 200 hegemony soldiers were dead, and Kim Tae-hyung's force had vanished completely. The human prisoners were still in hegemony hands, but Veltar noticed that Admiral Kravex no longer seemed confident about using them as leverage. In space, Captain Shin Minji was demonstrating why the humans were so difficult to predict. Her small fleet engaged a hegemony patrol squadron near the gas giant in the outer system. The engagement should have been a simple matter of superior hegemony firepower overwhelming the human ships. Instead, Shin Minji used the gas giant's gravity, and magnetic field in ways that Veltar had never seen attempted. Her ships dove into the planet's atmosphere, using the dense gases as cover, while the magnetic field disrupted hegemony sensors. When they emerged, they were behind the enemy formation and firing at point-blank range. The tactic was insane. No sane commander would risk their ships in a gas giant's atmosphere. The humans not only survived the maneuver, but used it to destroy 3 hegemony vessels before disappearing back into the swirling clouds. Veltar made frantic notes on his datapad. This engagement would require complete revision of accepted space, combat doctrine. The humans were treating their environment as a weapon, using hazards that other species avoided. Admiral Kravex was becoming increasingly erratic in his decision-making. The standard hegemony playbook was failing at every step, and his officers were starting to question his orders. Veltar could see the hegemony command structure beginning to strain under the pressure of facing an enemy that refused to behave, predictably. The situation deteriorated further when the humans began their own prisoner operations. Major Yoon Sung-ho led a raid on a hegemony supply depot that was supposed to be impossibly well defended. Instead of attacking the defenses directly, his forces waited until a supply convoy arrived and then attacked the ships while they were docked. But Yoon Sung-ho did not try to steal the supplies. Instead, he captured the entire hegemony supply crew and sent them back to Admiral Kravex with a message. "We return your people unharmed, as is proper. We trust you will extend the same courtesy to ours." Veltar was completely confused by this action. The humans had just demonstrated they could capture hegemony prisoners, but instead of using them for negotiations, they had simply released them. It made no strategic sense. Admiral Kravex was equally puzzled, but for different reasons. The returned hegemony soldiers reported that their human captors had been polite, professional, and had even provided medical treatment for their injuries. This was not the behavior expected from a species that had just watched their own civilians being threatened. The psychological warfare was working in reverse. Instead of breaking human morale, the hegemony's threats were making their own forces nervous. Veltar could see it in their communication patterns and movement formations. The hegemony soldiers were beginning to fear an enemy they could not understand. Commander Han Yunji was overseeing the evacuation of the 4th human colony when the hegemony fleet arrived to capture it. Instead of the panicked flight they expected, the hegemony found the evacuation proceeding with calm efficiency. The humans were not running in terror. They were executing a planned withdrawal. Every piece of useful equipment was being carefully removed and loaded onto transport ships. The humans were even taking apart their orbital stations piece by piece, denying the hegemony any useful salvage. When the last transport ship departed, they left behind a functioning colony that was completely useless to an occupying force. Admiral Kravex ordered the bombardment of the empty colony out of sheer frustration. As the planet burned, Commander Han Yunji sent a final transmission. Thank you for the target practice. Your bombardment patterns are most instructive. Veltar replayed that message several times, trying to understand what the human meant. Were they learning from the attacks? Were they studying hegemony tactics for some future purpose? The answer came when the humans launched their first coordinated counterattack. Captain Lee Dong-yun had been quietly positioning his forces throughout the system while the hegemony focused on capturing empty colonies. Now those forces struck simultaneously at 12 different hegemony positions. But this was not a conventional military assault. The humans targeted supply lines, communication relays, and isolated patrol ships. They were not trying to win a decisive battle. They were systematically degrading the hegemony's ability to maintain their invasion force. Veltar watched in fascination as the human attack unfolded. Every strike was precisely calculated to cause maximum disruption with minimum risk. The humans were fighting like they expected the war to last for years, not months. Admiral Kravex tried to respond with his own coordinated assault, but discovered that his forces were no longer where he thought they were. The constant need to guard captured colonies and protect supply lines had scattered his fleet across the entire system. The humans had turned the hegemony's territorial gains into strategic liabilities. As the second day of fighting ended, Veltar realized that something fundamental had shifted in the conflict. The hegemony still held superior numbers and firepower, but they were no longer dictating the terms of engagement. The humans had somehow seized the initiative without winning a single major battle. Colonel Park Ji-won sent a final transmission of the day to all human forces. Phase 1 complete. All units prepare for Phase 2 implementation. Veltar stared at his instruments in growing alarm. The humans had phases. This entire catastrophic day had been just the first part of a larger plan. He began to suspect that he was observing something far more dangerous than a desperate human resistance. He was watching humanity go to war. Admiral Kravex stood before his command staff, his confidence visibly shaken. 3 days of fighting had produced results that defied all military logic. The hegemony controlled 5 human colonies, held hundreds of prisoners, and maintained numerical superiority throughout the system. By every measure that mattered, they were winning. So why did it feel like they were losing? Veltar monitored the hegemony communications with growing fascination. The alien commanders were reporting situations that sounded impossible. Human forces appearing in locations they could not have reached. Supply convoys vanishing without. Distress calls. Captured facilities that somehow continued to explode days after being secured. Lieutenant Kim Tae-hyung was demonstrating tactics that had no name in any military manual Veltar knew. His unit had somehow infiltrated the hegemony-controlled colony of New Busan and was conducting operations from within the occupied territory. Not rescue missions or sabotage raids, but systematic harassment that was driving the occupying forces to exhaustion. The hegemony soldiers could not sleep, could not eat, could not perform routine duties without worrying about human attacks. But these were not random acts of violence. Every action served a specific purpose in degrading hegemony operational capacity. Kim Tae-hyung's forces would cut power lines during shift changes, forcing the hegemony to waste personnel on guard duty. They would contaminate water supplies with harmless but foul-smelling chemicals, making the occupation force sick and demoralized. They would play human music at high volume during hegemony rest periods, using psychological warfare to prevent sleep. Veltar had observed 17 species surrender to the hegemony. None of them had continued fighting from within captured territory. The very concept seemed to violate basic survival instincts. But the humans were not finished demonstrating their disregard for conventional warfare. Captain Shin Minji was conducting space operations that made Veltar question his understanding of physics. Her fleet had somehow hidden 12 ships inside the debris field of a destroyed asteroid mining station. When the Hegemony Patrol Squadron arrived to investigate, they found what appeared to be normal wreckage. The human ships activated while the Hegemony vessels were conducting their inspection, but instead of immediately opening fire, Shin Minji's forces used their engines to push chunks of asteroid debris into the enemy formation. The Hegemony ships found themselves under attack from rocks, traveling at significant fractions of light speed. By the time the Hegemony realized they were under attack, half their squadron was disabled or destroyed. The surviving ships retreated, reporting contact with asteroid-based defensive systems because they could not accept that living beings would use such tactics. Veltar made careful notes on the engagement. The humans had turned space debris into a weapon system. They were fighting with the environment itself as their ally. Admiral Kravex decided to escalate. If conventional occupation tactics were not working, he would implement total suppression protocols. The Hegemony fleet moved into bombardment positions around all captured human colonies and began systematic destruction of remaining infrastructure. The key? Human response was immediate and completely unexpected. Instead of pleading for the lives of their captured civilians, Captain Lee Dong-hyun transmitted detailed tactical analysis of the Hegemony bombardment patterns to all human forces. He was using the destruction of his own colonies as a learning opportunity. "Attention all units," Lee Dong-hyun's voice was calm and professional. "The enemy has provided excellent data on their fire control systems and targeting priorities. Analysis indicates optimal defensive positioning for future engagements." Veltar felt a chill run through his nervous system. The humans were studying their own destruction to gain military advantage. They were treating the bombardment of their colonies as an educational experience. Major Yoon Sung-ho was implementing the lessons learned in real time. His defensive positions around the last unconquered human colony incorporated everything the humans had observed about hegemony tactics. The result was a fortress that seemed designed specifically to counter every weapon in the hegemony arsenal. When the hegemony fleet arrived to complete their conquest, they found defensive systems that negated their standard bombardment doctrine. Energy shields positioned to deflect rather than absorb incoming fire. Decoy installations that drew attacks away from real targets. Underground facilities that could survive direct orbital bombardment. But most disturbing of all was the realization that the humans had built these defenses in less than 4 days. They were adapting to hegemony tactics faster than the hegemony could implement them. Commander Han Yunji was coordinating something in the outer system that Veltar's sensors could barely detect. Massive construction projects were proceeding at multiple locations, hidden within asteroid fields and gas giant moons. The humans were building infrastructure while simultaneously fighting a war. Veltar enhanced his long-range scanners and tried to determine what the humans were constructing. The energy signatures suggested industrial facilities, but their purpose remained unclear. Why would a species under invasion be building factories instead of weapons? The answer became apparent when the first human-built ships began emerging from the construction sites. They were unlike anything in Veltar's database of known spacecraft designs. The hulls were angular and aggressive, covered in weapon mounts and sensor arrays. But more disturbing was their size. These were not the small patrol craft the humans had been using. These were warships designed for fleet combat. Captain Lee Dong-hyun had been buying time for humanity to industrialize for war. Colonel Jang Woo-jin, took command of the first new human warship and immediately demonstrated why the hegemony should have been more concerned about human construction projects. His vessel engaged a hegemony heavy cruiser in single combat and systematically destroyed it using weapons that should not have existed. The human ship fired projectiles that seemed to ignore hegemony defensive systems, energy beams that cut through, armor like it was fabric. And most terrifying of all, the ship itself seemed to learn from each exchange, adjusting its tactics in real time to counter hegemony countermeasures. Veltar realized that the humans had been reverse engineering hegemony technology from the very beginning of the conflict. Every captured weapon, every piece of debris, every scrap of information had been analyzed and incorporated into their own designs. The humans were not just fighting the hegemony, they were stealing their technological advantages. Dr. Lee Subin was coordinating the technical analysis from a hidden research facility. Her teams were working around the clock to understand and improve upon hegemony military technology. But they were not simply copying alien designs, they were finding ways to make them better. Veltar intercepted some of Dr. Lee Subin's research communications and was shocked by what he heard. The humans were identifying weaknesses in hegemony, technology that the hegemony themselves did not know existed. They were finding design flaws that had been overlooked for generations. The enemy power coupling systems are inefficient by approximately 30%, Dr. Lee Subin reported to her research teams. We can improve the design and use the modifications in our own weapons. The humans were not just learning from their enemies, they were surpassing them. Admiral Kravex called for reinforcements from the hegemony home fleet. His original invasion force was being systematically worn down by an enemy that refused to fight fair. But the request for additional ships revealed the true scope of the hegemony's problem. The humans had been intercepting and decoding hegemony communications from the beginning of the conflict. They knew about the reinforcement request before the ships even departed hegemony space. Captain Shin Minji was already positioning her forces to intercept the incoming fleet, but she was not planning to fight the reinforcements when they arrived. Instead, she intended to attack them during their hyperspace transition, when their shields would be down and their weapons offline. The humans were planning to destroy an entire fleet during the most vulnerable moment of their journey. Veltar had never heard of anyone attacking ships during hyperspace transition. It was considered impossible by most species and suicidal by the rest. The humans were attempting it as standard tactical doctrine. The attack succeeded beyond all expectations. Captain Shin Minji's forces destroyed 18 hegemony reinforcement vessels before they could even activate their defensive systems. The survivors retreated immediately, reporting that human space was protected by impossible weapons that could strike during hyperspace transition. Admiral Kravex was left with a crippled invasion force, no prospect of reinforcement, and an enemy that seemed to grow stronger with each passing day. His communications with hegemony high command were becoming increasingly desperate. The humans do not fight like any species we have encountered, he reported. They use tactics that should not work. They employ strategies that violate basic military principles. They treat warfare like a creative exercise rather than a serious endeavor. Veltar found himself agreeing with the Admiral's assessment. The humans were approaching war as if it were a problem to be solved rather than a conflict to be won. They were innovating faster than their enemies could adapt. Admiral Kravex made the decision that would haunt him for the rest of his short life. Faced with an enemy that refused to follow the rules of civilized warfare, he chose to abandon those rules himself. The hegemony fleet turned their weapons toward the blue-green planet that hung in the center of the human system. Earth. Veltar watched the tactical display with professional interest tinged by unease. Threatening an enemy's homeworld was the ultimate escalation in galactic warfare. Every species he had observed reached this point eventually, and every species had surrendered when faced with the destruction of their birth planet. But as he monitored human communications, Veltar heard something that made his scales crawl, with apprehension. The humans were not panicking. They were not begging for negotiation. Instead, they were discussing the incoming threat with the same calm professionalism they had shown throughout the conflict. Captain Lee Dong-yun's voice came across all human frequencies. All units, this is command. The enemy has committed to total warfare. Earth Defense Protocol is now active. All civilians have 72 hours to reach minimum safe distance. Veltar enhanced his sensors to observe the human homeworld more closely. What he saw defied everything he thought he knew about species' survival instincts. Instead of trying to negotiate or mount a desperate defense, the humans were evacuating their entire planet. But this was not the panicked flight of a defeated people. The evacuation was proceeding with the same methodical efficiency the humans had shown in everything else. Massive transport ships were lifting off from every spaceport on Earth, carrying not just people but entire industrial facilities. Major Yoon Sung-ho was coordinating the planetary evacuation from the surface. His forces were not just saving lives. They were preserving human civilization itself. Factories were being disassembled and loaded onto transport ships. Research facilities were being packed up and relocated. Even historical artifacts and cultural treasures were being carefully cataloged and evacuated. The humans were treating their homeworld like a military asset that could be abandoned if necessary. Veltar tried to run psychological profiles on the human leadership and found that his computer models could not process their behavior. No known species would willingly abandon their homeworld. The emotional and cultural connections should make such a decision impossible. But the humans seemed to view Earth as just another piece of territory in a larger strategic equation. Commander. Han Yunji was overseeing the evacuation of Earth's orbital installations when she made a discovery that changed everything. The approaching hegemony fleet was not just planning to threaten Earth. They were positioning for complete planetary destruction. Admiral Kravex intended to turn the human homeworld into an asteroid field. Her report to Captain Lee Dong-yun was delivered in the same calm tone the humans used for routine status updates. Command, this is orbital control. Enemy fleet positioning. Indicates intention for total planetary destruction rather than bombardment threat. Recommend immediate implementation of Contingency 7. Veltar had never heard of Contingency 7, but something about the way Han Yunji said it made him wish he were much farther away from the human system. Captain Lee Dong-yun's response came immediately. Orbital control. You are authorized for Contingency 7 implementation. All units acknowledge and prepare for maximum yield scenario. Throughout the human fleet, acknowledgements came back with disturbing eagerness. The humans were not just accepting the possibility of their homeworld's destruction, they seemed almost excited by the opportunity. Dr. Lee Subin was working frantically in her research facility to complete something she called the Earth Package. Veltar's sensors could not determine exactly what she was preparing, but the energy readings suggested it involved every piece of advanced technology the humans had developed during the war. Package integration at 90%, Dr. Lee Subin reported. All systems will be ready for deployment when the enemy reaches optimal position. Admiral Kravex was unaware that his intended victims were making their own preparations. He positioned his fleet in a perfect bombardment formation around Earth and began charging his weapons for planetary destruction. From his perspective, he was about to end human resistance by eliminating their emotional and cultural center. He had no idea that he was positioning his entire fleet exactly where the humans wanted them. Colonel Jiang Wu-jin was commanding the new human warships that had been hidden throughout the system. As the hegemony fleet focused on Earth, his forces began moving into attack positions. But they were not planning to defend the planet. They were planning to use it as bait. "All strike units, this is Wolf Leader," Jiang Wu-jin transmitted. "Enemy has taken the bait. Prepare for total engagement on my mark." The hegemony bombardment of Earth began at exactly 14 Dathan system time. Veltar watched in fascination as the planet's surface erupted in fire and destruction. Cities vanished in brilliant flashes of light. Oceans boiled away into steam. The atmosphere itself began to burn. But instead of the human surrender he expected, Veltar heard something that made his blood freeze. The humans were cheering. "Beautiful work!" Captain Shin Minji's voice was filled with genuine admiration. "Look at those energy discharge patterns. We can use that data to improve our own planetary bombardment systems." The humans were studying the destruction of their own homeworld as a learning experience. Admiral Kravex was so focused on the bombardment that he failed to notice human ships emerging from concealment throughout the system. By the time his sensors detected the approaching threat, it was too late to maneuver his fleet out of the trap. Colonel Jiang Wu-jin's strike force hit the hegemony fleet while their weapons were still firing at Earth. The human ships used the planet's gravity well and the energy discharge from the bombardment to mask their approach. They emerged from Earth's dying atmosphere like demons rising from hell, but this was not a desperate last stand by a dying species. This was a carefully planned military operation that used the destruction of Earth as a tactical advantage. The human weapons had been specifically designed to exploit weaknesses discovered during months of studying hegemony technology. Every shot was precisely targeted to cause maximum damage to enemy systems. The humans were not just fighting, they were demonstrating their mastery of hegemony military science. General Park Hyun-woo coordinated the overall battle from his command ship hidden in the asteroid belt. His tactical displays showed the hegemony fleet being systematically destroyed by an enemy they had thought they were defeating. The humans had turned their own planet's destruction into the ultimate ambush. Strike Force Alpha, adjust firing. Solutions for maximum psychological impact, Park Hyun-woo ordered. We want the survivors to remember this moment. Veltar realized that the humans were not just trying to win the battle, they were sending a message to the entire galaxy about what happened to species that threatened Earth. Admiral Kravex's flagship was crippled in the first wave of attacks. As his ship drifted helplessly, he received a communication from Captain Lee Dong-yun that would be his last memory of the human system. Admiral Kravex, this is Captain Lee Dong-yun. Thank you for the demonstration. We now understand the full extent of your capabilities and intentions. We will respond appropriately. The human tone was not angry or triumphant. It was the same calm professionalism they had shown throughout the conflict. They were treating the destruction of their homeworld and the annihilation of an invasion fleet as routine military exercises. The battle lasted 6 hours. When it ended, the hegemony fleet had been completely destroyed. Of the 200 ships that had entered the human system, only 12 survived to retreat back to hegemony space. They carried with them the news that humanity had sacrificed their own homeworld to eliminate an enemy fleet. But Veltar noticed something that made the human victory even more disturbing. The evacuation of Earth had been so efficient that less than 1% of the human population had been lost in the planet's destruction. The humans had traded worthless rock and metal for the annihilation of their enemies. Dr. Lee Subin's research teams were already analyzing the wreckage of Earth and the destroyed hegemony fleet. Excellent data from both the bombardment and the engagement, she reported. We can improve both our defensive and offensive capabilities based on this information. The humans had learned more from losing their homeworld than most species learned from winning wars. Commander Han Unji was coordinating the establishment of new human colonies on the worlds they had evacuated earlier in the conflict. The humans were not homeless refugees. They were a mobile civilization that could relocate anywhere they chose. New Earth colony establishment proceeding on schedule, Han Yunji reported. All critical infrastructure will be operational within 30 days. The humans had not just survived the loss of their home world, they had used it as an opportunity to improve their strategic position. Captain Lee Dong-yun sent a final transmission to all human forces as the system began to settle into its new configuration. Phase 4. Complete. Enemy capabilities fully analyzed and countered. Prepare for Phase 5 implementation. We are no longer defending. We are hunting. The 12 surviving hegemony ships limped back to their home system carrying news that would change the galaxy forever. They brought word of humanity's response to the destruction of Earth, and that response was unlike anything the galaxy had ever witnessed. Veltar monitored their communications as they fled human space. The survivors were not just reporting a military defeat. They were describing an encounter with something that violated their understanding of how intelligent life behaved. The humans had sacrificed their homeworld and then used its destruction to annihilate their enemies. But Veltar was beginning to understand that the loss of Earth had changed something fundamental in humanity itself. The species that had shown restraint and followed at least some conventions of civilized warfare was gone. What remained was something that had no limits. Captain Lee Dong-yun's first order after the destruction of Earth was simple and terrifying. All units, this is command. We are no longer bound by peacetime operational restrictions. Total warfare protocols are now in effect. The enemy has shown us their true nature. We will respond in kind. Throughout human space, military commanders acknowledged the order with grim satisfaction. The humans had been fighting with one hand tied behind their backs, trying to preserve some semblance of civilized conduct. Now they were free to show what they were truly capable of. Colonel Jang Woo-jin took the first human fleet into hegemony, space within hours of Earth's destruction. But this was not a revenge raid or desperate counterattack. It was the beginning of a systematic campaign to demonstrate what happened to species that committed genocide against humanity. The hegemony border system of Kethvar was their first target. Jang Woo-jin's forces arrived without warning and immediately began implementing tactics that Veltar had never seen attempted. They did not attack the planet directly. Instead, they began dismantling the entire star system. Asteroid mining platforms were converted into weapons that hurled massive rocks at industrial targets. Gas giant harvesting stations were turned into bombs that poisoned the atmosphere of inhabited moons. Even the system's star was not safe. The humans began using solar manipulation technology to create devastating solar flares. The hegemony defenders found themselves fighting an enemy that treated the laws of physics as weapons. Every celestial body in the system became a potential threat under human control. Dr. Lee Subin had developed new applications for the technology stolen from the hegemony fleet. Her research teams were creating weapons that turned an enemy's own infrastructure against them. Power grids became electromagnetic pulse generators. Water supplies became chemical weapon delivery systems. Communication networks became psychological warfare platforms. We have successfully integrated hegemony technology with human innovation, Dr. Lee Subin reported. The enemy's own systems are now vulnerable to manipulation and reversal. We can turn their civilization into a weapon against itself. The humans were not just defeating their enemies, they were corrupting everything the hegemony had built. Major Yoon Sung-ho was conducting ground operations on captured hegemony worlds that redefined the concept of occupation. Instead of simply holding territory, his forces were systematically converting hegemony infrastructure to human use, while making the planets uninhabitable for their original owners. The air was adjusted to human optimal breathing mixture. The gravity was modified using planetary engineering technology. Even the electromagnetic spectrum was altered to match human sensory preferences. The hegemony could recapture their worlds, but they would no longer be able to live on them. Territory. Conversion proceeding according to schedule, Yoon Sung-ho reported. Enemy worlds will be suitable for human habitation within 6 months. Original inhabitants will require environmental suits for survival on their own planets. The humans were stealing entire worlds by making them uninhabitable to anyone else. General Park Hyun-woo was coordinating the overall human war effort from his mobile command center. The human fleet had transformed into something that bore no resemblance to the defensive force that had started the conflict. They were now a conquering army that moved from system to system like a plague. But Park Hyun-woo was not simply seeking military victory. He was implementing a strategy designed to break the hegemony's will to fight by demonstrating the futility of resistance against an enemy that had no limits. Psychological warfare analysis indicates optimal terror threshold achieved, Park Hyun-woo reported. Enemy morale is approaching collapse point. Recommend escalation to Phase 6 implementation. The humans were using fear as a weapon more effectively than any conventional military technology. Captain Shin Minji was pioneering new forms of space combat that seemed to violate the basic principles of warfare. Her fleet would arrive in a system, destroy all military opposition, and then simply leave without occupying the territory. The message was clear. The humans could strike anywhere, anytime, and there was nothing the hegemony could do to stop them. But Shin Minji was not just demonstrating human military superiority. She was conducting psychological experiments on an entire species. Each attack was designed to test hegemony responses and push them toward specific behaviors. Enemy psychological profile updated based on latest engagement data, Shin Minji reported. Fear responses are within predicted parameters. Recommend continued pressure to achieve complete morale breakdown. The humans were treating the hegemony like laboratory subjects in a massive behavioral experiment. Commander Han Yunji was establishing new human colonies on worlds throughout hegemony space, but these were not traditional settlements. They were fortress cities designed to serve as permanent bases for ongoing human operations. The humans were not just conquering hegemony territory, they were claiming it as their own. Each new colony was equipped with manufacturing facilities, research, laboratories, and military installations. The humans were building an empire in the heart of hegemony space while simultaneously destroying everything the hegemony had created. Colonial expansion proceeding ahead of schedule, Han Yunji reported. Industrial capacity in occupied territory. now exceeds pre-war human production levels. We are becoming stronger through conquest. The humans were using their enemy's own resources to fuel their war machine. The Hegemony High Command was experiencing something unprecedented in their species' history: complete strategic helplessness. Every defensive measure they implemented was countered by human innovations. Every attack they launched was turned against them. Every alliance they sought was dissolved by human psychological warfare. Veltar monitored their desperate communications as they tried to understand what they were fighting. The hegemony military analysts could not classify human tactical doctrine because it changed constantly. They could not predict human strategy because it seemed to have no consistent logic. They could not negotiate because the humans were not interested in terms. The enemy does not fight for territory or resources, one hegemony general reported. They fight for the experience of fighting. They seem to enjoy the process of warfare itself. We cannot offer them anything they want more than the opportunity to continue destroying us. The hegemony was beginning to understand that they had awakened something that viewed war as entertainment. Admiral Kravex's replacement, Admiral Thorek, tried to implement total mobilization of hegemony forces. Every ship, every soldier, every weapon was committed to stopping the human advance. The result was the largest military engagement in hegemony history. The humans won in 6 hours. Colonel Zhang Wujin commanded the human forces in what the hegemony would later call the Massacre of Vorthak. Using tactics that seemed to come from a nightmare, his fleet destroyed over 400 hegemony vessels while losing only 12 of their own ships. But the most disturbing aspect of the battle was not the human victory. It was their behavior during the fighting. Veltar monitored their communications and heard laughter, jokes, and casual conversation. The humans were enjoying themselves. "Nice shot, Minji," one human pilot called out after destroying a hegemony cruiser. "Did you see that explosion? Beautiful work." The humans were treating the annihilation of their enemies as a form of artistic expression. Dr. Lee Subin analyzed the wreckage of the hegemony fleet and made discoveries that would revolutionize human military technology again. "Excellent salvage from the engagement," she reported. "We can improve our weapons efficiency by another 30% based on this data." The humans were becoming more dangerous with every battle they fought. The psychological impact on the hegemony was total. Veltar observed their military communications degrade from professional reports to panicked pleas for help. Their soldiers were deserting in massive numbers. Their commanders were requesting reassignment to any posting that did not involve fighting humans. "We cannot win," Admiral Thorek transmitted to Hegemony High Command. "The enemy is not bound by the same limitations that govern civilized species. They have no concept of proportional response or acceptable losses. They will not stop until we are extinct." The hegemony was learning what it meant to face an enemy that had no rules. Phase 6 began with a single transmission from Captain Lee Dong-yun to every human force throughout the galaxy. The message was brief, but its implications would reshape the understanding of warfare for every species that heard it. "All units, this is command. We have sufficiently studied our enemy. Academic phase complete. Time to demonstrate the human way of war." Veltar felt his blood crystallize as he realized what those words meant. Everything the humans had done so far, the destruction of fleets, the conquest of systems, the annihilation of entire military forces, had been research. They had been learning how to fight by fighting, and now they were ready to apply those lessons. General Park Hyun-woo implemented the new tactical doctrine across all human forces simultaneously. The change was immediate and terrifying. Human ships that had been moving in conventional formations suddenly began operating in patterns that seemed to defy physics. Human ground forces abandoned recognizable military structures and began fighting as a single coordinated organism. The hegemony military observers could no longer classify human tactical doctrine because it was evolving in real time. Every engagement saw the introduction of new techniques, new strategies, new applications of technology that should not have been possible. Enemy forces are implementing unknown tactical innovations at unprecedented rate, Admiral Thorek reported to Hegemony High Command. We cannot counter strategies that did not exist an hour ago. The humans were inventing new ways to fight faster than their enemies could learn to defend against them. Captain Choi Ariam took command of the human space forces in the Hegemony core systems and immediately demonstrated why the galaxy should fear human creativity applied to warfare. Her fleet began using gravitational manipulation technology to turn space itself into a weapon. Black holes were created and moved like artillery pieces. Neutron stars were destabilized to produce gamma ray bursts that could sterilize entire star systems. Even empty space was weaponized using exotic matter generation that created zones where the laws of physics operated differently. Veltar watched in fascination and horror as Choi Ariam's forces engaged a hegemony defensive fleet using tactics that transformed the battlefield into an alien landscape. Ships that entered certain zones simply ceased to exist. Others found their weapons firing backward in time. Some discovered that their hulls had been converted to antimatter. Space superiority achieved through reality manipulation, Choi Ariam reported with casual satisfaction. Enemy forces are unable to operate in modified physics zones. Recommend expansion of technique to additional theaters. The humans were changing the fundamental rules of existence to gain military advantage. Major Kim Ji-hoon was pioneering ground combat techniques that redefined what it meant to fight on planetary surfaces. His forces had abandoned conventional weapons in favor of environmental manipulation tools that turned entire worlds into weapons against their inhabitants. Tectonic plates were adjusted to create earthquakes in enemy positions. Weather patterns were modified to produce devastating storms on demand. Even planetary rotation was altered to disrupt enemy circadian rhythms and biological functions. Planetary control achieved through geological warfare, Kim Ji-hoon reported. Enemy forces cannot maintain combat effectiveness when the planet itself is fighting against them. The humans were treating worlds like giant machines that could be reprogrammed to serve their military objectives. Dr. Lee Subin had moved beyond simply improving human technology to creating entirely new scientific disciplines. Her research teams were developing weapons based on theoretical physics concepts that most species had never considered practical applications. Quantum entanglement was used to create instantaneous communication and coordination across galactic distances. Dimensional manipulation allowed human forces to attack from directions that did not exist in normal space. Time dilation effects were weaponized to give human forces effective immortality during combat. Scientific warfare protocols implemented successfully, Dr. Lee Subin reported. We are no longer limited by conventional understanding of physical laws. Reality is now a tactical resource. The humans were using science itself as a weapon system. Commander Han Yunji was establishing what she called integration colonies throughout former hegemony space. These were not simple human settlements. They were experimental communities designed to test new forms of civilization that incorporated both human and alien elements. Captured hegemony populations were not enslaved. or exterminated. Instead, they were integrated into human society through techniques that preserved their knowledge while ensuring their loyalty. The humans were not just conquering their enemies, they were converting them into assets. Integration protocols proceeding successfully, Han Yunji reported. Former enemy populations are contributing to human war effort while maintaining cultural identity. We are growing stronger through absorption rather than destruction. The humans were consuming their enemies and becoming more powerful in the process. Admiral Song Minwoo was coordinating fleet operations across multiple galaxies simultaneously. The human expansion had moved beyond the local galactic cluster to encompass regions of space that most species had never explored. Human ships were appearing in star systems that were supposed to be impossible to reach. But Song Minwoo was not simply expanding human territory. He was conducting a systematic survey of galactic civilization to identify potential threats and opportunities. Every species was being evaluated for their potential contribution to human objectives. Galactic Survey 30% complete, Song Minwoo reported. Multiple species identified as potential integration candidates. Several civilizations classified as obstacles requiring removal. Recommend acceleration of Phase 7 preparations. The humans were planning the conquest of the entire galaxy. Colonel Zhang Wujin had transformed his forces into something that could no longer be classified as a military unit. His ships and soldiers operated as a single entity that could adapt to any situation and overcome any obstacle through pure creative application of violence. When faced with enemy shields, they invented new forms of penetration. When confronted with superior numbers, they developed techniques for multiplication of force effectiveness. When challenged by unknown technology, they reverse-engineered and improved it during combat. Tactical innovation rate exceeds enemy adaptation. Capacity by factor of 12, Zhang Wujin reported. We are becoming more dangerous, faster than they can become more defensive. The humans were evolving into the perfect predator species. Captain Shin Minji was conducting what she called educational warfare against species that had not yet encountered human forces. These were not conquest campaigns, but demonstration projects designed to show the galaxy what resistance to humanity would accomplish. Entire civilizations were systematically dismantled and rebuilt according to human specifications. The process was recorded and broadcast to every species in the galaxy as a form of psychological warfare on a cosmic scale. Educational programs proceeding according to schedule, Shin Minji reported. Galactic opinion regarding human capabilities is approaching optimal terror levels. Recommend continued demonstration activities. The humans were teaching the galaxy to fear them through practical examples. Commander Yang Su-yung was overseeing the liberation of every species that had ever been conquered by the hegemony. But this was not simple humanitarian intervention. It was a systematic program to recruit allies and eliminate potential future threats. Species that accepted human leadership were granted advanced technology and protection. Those that refused were classified as obstacles and scheduled for educational warfare. The choice was simple: join humanity or become a teaching aid. Liberation operations 90% complete, Yang Su-yung reported. Most species have chosen integration over resistance. Remaining holdouts are being processed according to standard protocols. The humans were giving the galaxy a choice between assimilation and annihilation. The hegemony high command finally understood what they were facing. Admiral Thorek's final transmission to his government was monitored by Veltar and would become one of the most important documents in galactic history. We are not fighting a war, Thorek reported. We are being studied by a species that views conflict as a form of scientific research. They are learning how to conquer the galaxy by practicing on us. We cannot win because victory is not their objective. Knowledge is their objective, and they are acquiring it through our destruction. The hegemony realized that they had become test subjects in humanity's education program. Fleet Admiral No Dion transmitted the final Phase 6 summary to all human forces. Educational phase complete. Enemy capabilities fully understood and countered. Galactic survey data sufficient for strategic planning. Phase 7 authorized. Time to implement the new order. Veltar stared at his monitoring equipment in complete terror. The humans had phases beyond this. They had been studying the entire galaxy while simultaneously conquering it. He began to understand that he had not been observing a war. He had been watching humanity's final examination before graduation to galactic dominance. Everything that had happened was just preparation for what they really intended to accomplish. The hegemony's final surrender came not through military defeat, but through the complete collapse of their ability to understand what they were fighting. Admiral Thorek's last transmission was a simple message. We yield to superior intelligence. Humanity has demonstrated capabilities beyond our comprehension. We request terms. But Veltar realized that the hegemony's surrender was meaningless. The humans had moved far beyond caring about their original enemy. The war with the hegemony had become a minor detail in a much larger project that encompassed the transformation of galactic civilization itself. Captain Lee Dong-yun's response to the hegemony surrender was characteristic of the new human perspective. Surrender acknowledged. Integration protocols will be implemented according to standard procedures. Your resistance has provided valuable data for our ongoing educational programs. The humans were treating the collapse of an interstellar empire as a routine administrative matter. Admiral Song Minwoo was implementing Phase 7 across multiple galactic sectors simultaneously. Human fleets were appearing in star systems that had never been contacted by any spacefaring civilization. They were not conquering virgin territory. They were claiming it as part of humanity's manifest destiny to inherit the galaxy. But Song Minwoo's operations were not simple expansion. Each newly contacted species was evaluated according to criteria that Veltar could not fully understand. Some were immediately offered integration into human civilization. Others were classified for educational warfare. A few were simply ignored, as irrelevant to human objectives. Galactic integration proceeding ahead of schedule, Song Minwoo reported. 73 species have accepted human guidance. 21 species require educational intervention. 4 species have been classified as incompatible with galactic harmony. The humans were conducting a systematic reorganization of intelligent life throughout the galaxy. General Im Kyung-ho was coordinating ground operations on thousands of worlds simultaneously. His forces had evolved beyond recognizable military units into something that resembled a form of guided evolution. Human soldiers were adapting to local conditions and integrating with native species in ways that created entirely new forms of life. The result was not conquest in any traditional sense, but rather a process of guided development that transformed both humans and aliens into something greater than either species could achieve alone. The galaxy was becoming a laboratory for human experiments in biological and social engineering. Integration protocols successful on 94% of contacted worlds, Im Kyung-ho reported. Hybrid populations are exceeding performance expectations. Genetic and cultural fusion is producing enhanced capabilities across all measured parameters. The humans were creating a new form of galactic civilization through direct manipulation of evolutionary processes. Commander Yang Su-Yung was overseeing the final liberation of all remaining hegemony territory, but her operations revealed the true scope of human planning. The infrastructure being established in former hegemony space was not designed for human use. It was designed for species that did not yet exist. The humans were building a civilization for the hybrid populations. They intended to create through integration with hundreds of alien species. They were constructing the framework for a galactic society that would combine the best characteristics of every intelligent species they encountered. Infrastructure development proceeding according to specifications, Yang Su-Yung reported. Facilities are configured for optimal utilization by projected hybrid populations. We are building the foundation for a new form of galactic civilization. The humans were engineering the future of intelligence itself. Dr. Lee Subin had moved beyond military research to fundamental investigation of consciousness and intelligence. Her teams were developing techniques for direct knowledge transfer between species, consciousness integration protocols, and methods for enhancing cognitive capabilities through technological augmentation. The goal was not simply to understand alien species, but to create new forms of intelligence that incorporated the mental capabilities of every species in the galaxy. The humans were planning to transcend the limitations of biological evolution through technological integration. Consciousness research producing promising results, Dr. Lee Subin reported. Direct knowledge transfer protocols successful in preliminary trials. Enhanced intelligence integration showing potential for exponential capability increases. The humans were redesigning the nature of thought itself. Captain Choi Ariam was conducting space operations that transformed the physical structure of the galaxy. Her fleets were moving stars, creating new planetary systems, and establishing transportation networks that would allow instantaneous travel between any 2 points in galactic space. But this was not simple engineering. The modifications to galactic structure were designed to optimize the development of intelligence and consciousness throughout the galaxy. The humans were creating a physical environment that would encourage the evolution of ever more sophisticated forms of life. Galactic infrastructure modification proceeding successfully, Choi Ariam reported. Stellar positioning optimized for maximum biological development potential. Transportation networks will enable instantaneous coordination across all populated systems. The humans were rebuilding the galaxy as a machine for producing intelligence. Major Kim Ji-hoon was establishing training centers on worlds throughout human space where representatives of every known species could learn to integrate with human civilization. But these were not simple educational facilities. They were transformation centers where aliens learned to think and act like humans while retaining their own unique capabilities. The result was the creation of hybrid intelligences that combined human creativity and adaptability with alien specializations and perspectives. The galaxy was becoming populated by beings that were simultaneously human and alien. Training programs producing exceptional results, Kim Ji-hoon reported. Hybrid graduates are demonstrating capabilities that exceed both human and alien baseline. Performance. Integration is creating emergent intelligence forms. The humans were teaching the galaxy to become more human while becoming more alien themselves. Colonel Jang Woo-jin was conducting military operations that no longer resembled warfare in any recognizable sense. His forces were eliminating obstacles to galactic integration through methods that were simultaneously violent and creative. Resistance was not simply crushed, it was transformed into compliance through techniques that changed the fundamental nature of opposition. Species that resisted Human integration were not destroyed, but rather educated until they understood the benefits of cooperation. The process was irreversible and produced converts who became enthusiastic supporters of human objectives. Resistance elimination proceeding according to plan, Zhang Wujin reported. Hostile species are being successfully converted to cooperative. Status. Educational warfare is producing permanent attitude modification. The humans were eliminating opposition by transforming enemies into allies. Fleet Admiral No Daeun was coordinating the overall human expansion from her mobile command center that had grown to encompass an entire star system. Her operations spanned multiple galaxies and involved the simultaneous management of thousands of different species and civilizations. But No Daeun was not simply commanding military forces. She was conducting a symphony of galactic transformation that involved every aspect of intelligent life. The humans had become the conductors of an evolutionary process that would reshape consciousness itself. Galactic coordination systems operating at optimal efficiency, No Daeun reported. All sectors showing positive integration progress. Phase 8 preparations are complete, ready to implement final transformation protocols. The humans were ready to complete their reconstruction of the galaxy. Veltar realized that his observations had recorded something unprecedented in galactic history. He had witnessed the emergence of a species that viewed the entire galaxy as a single organism that needed to be optimized for maximum intelligence and consciousness development. The humans had not simply won a war. They had demonstrated that war itself was an obsolete concept. They had replaced conflict with integration, conquest with transformation, and victory with evolution. But most disturbing of all was Veltar's growing realization that the humans had known this would happen from the very beginning. The war with Saudi, the hegemony, had been a carefully planned educational exercise designed to teach humanity how to manage galactic civilization. The humans had used their enemies as teachers and their victories as learning experiences. They had transformed every obstacle into an opportunity and every defeat into data for improvement. Captain Lee Dong-yun's final transmission of Phase 7 confirmed Veltar's worst fears. Educational program complete. All galactic species cataloged and evaluated. Integration protocols tested and verified. Phase 8 authorized. Time to implement the new galactic order. Veltar understood that he had observed the end of one form of galactic civilization and the beginning of something entirely new. The humans had not conquered the galaxy. They had graduated to become its managers, and their final examination was about to begin. Phase 8 began not with warfare, but with an invitation. Every species in the galaxy received the same message from Captain Lee Dong-hyun, transmitted simultaneously to every inhabited world in known space. The message was simple, but its implications would reshape the future of intelligent life. To all species and civilizations, humanity extends an invitation to join the Galactic Integration Project. We have demonstrated our capabilities and intentions. You have seen what cooperation offers and what resistance accomplishes. The choice is yours. Veltar monitored the responses from thousands of species across the galaxy. The variety was enormous, but the patterns were clear. Advanced civilizations that had observed human capabilities chose immediate integration. Aggressive species that had tested human resolve requested terms for surrender. Primitive cultures that had never encountered humanity simply accepted their guidance as natural law. The galaxy was choosing to become human. Fleet Admiral No Daeun was coordinating the largest administrative operation in galactic history. The integration of thousands of species and civilizations into a single coherent structure required management capabilities that exceeded anything previously attempted by any species. But the humans had prepared for this moment throughout their entire expansion. Every battle had been a training exercise. Every conquest had been a test of integration protocols. Every victory had been a step toward this final transformation of galactic civilization. Integration operations proceeding at optimal efficiency, No Daeun reported. Galactic administrative systems are handling maximum projected load. All species are being successfully incorporated into unified command structure. The humans had become the government of the galaxy. General Im Kyung-ho was overseeing the establishment of what he called development centers on worlds throughout galactic space. These facilities were designed to accelerate the evolution of intelligence and consciousness among all integrated species. The goal was to create a galactic civilization where every being could reach their maximum potential. But the development centers were not just educational facilities. They were transformation engines that could modify biology, psychology, and even consciousness itself. Species that entered the centers emerged as enhanced versions of themselves that were simultaneously more capable and more human. Development operations showing exceptional results, Im Kyung-ho reported. Enhanced populations are exceeding all performance projections. Galactic intelligence levels are increasing exponentially across all measured parameters. The humans were upgrading the galaxy itself. Dr. Lee Subin had achieved breakthroughs in consciousness research that allowed direct integration between different forms of intelligence. Her techniques enabled humans to share thoughts and experiences with any species while allowing aliens to access human creativity and adaptability. The result was the emergence of a galactic consciousness that combined the perspectives and capabilities of every intelligent species. The galaxy was becoming a single mind composed of trillions of individual thoughts working in perfect harmony. Consciousness integration protocols fully operational, Dr. Lee Subin reported. Galactic mind networks are achieving stable synchronization. We are creating a form of intelligence that exceeds the sum of its components. The humans were building a god out of the galaxy's collective intelligence. Commander Yang Soo-young was implementing the final liberation protocols for species that had been oppressed by aggressive civilizations throughout galactic history. But liberation under human guidance meant more than simple freedom. It meant transformation into something greater than the species had ever imagined possible. Freed populations were not just given independence. They were given enhanced capabilities, expanded consciousness, and integration into the galactic community as full partners in humanity's vision of optimized civilization. Liberation operations complete, Yang Soo-young reported. All oppressed populations have been freed and integrated. Former victim species are now contributing to galactic development as enhanced partners. The humans had eliminated suffering by eliminating the limitations that made suffering possible. Captain Choi Ariam had completed her modification of galactic physical structure. The transportation networks she had established allowed instantaneous communication and travel between any 2 points in the galaxy. The stellar engineering projects had optimized energy production and distribution throughout galactic space. But most importantly, the physical modifications had created an environment where consciousness could develop and expand without limit. The galaxy had become a machine for producing and enhancing intelligence. Galactic infrastructure optimization complete, Choi Ariam reported. All systems are operating at maximum efficiency. Physical environment is now optimized for unlimited consciousness development. The humans had turned the galaxy into a consciousness generation facility. Major Kim Ji-hoon was overseeing the final integration of military forces from every species into a unified galactic defense organization. But this was not an army designed for conquest. It was a force created to protect and guide the development of intelligence throughout the galaxy and beyond. The integrated forces combined human tactical innovation with the specialized capabilities of every species. The result was a military organization that could handle any conceivable threat while simultaneously serving as a development agency for emerging civilizations. Military integration complete, Kim Ji-hoon reported. Galactic defense forces are fully operational. We are prepared to protect and guide intelligence development throughout known space and beyond. The humans had created guardians for the galaxy's future. Colonel Jang Woo-jin was conducting operations beyond the galactic rim, making contact with civilizations in other galaxies and extending humanity's invitation to join the integration project. The techniques developed for managing galactic civilization were proving applicable to larger scales of organization. The humans were not content with controlling a single galaxy. They were implementing their vision of optimized intelligence development throughout the universe itself. Extragalactic operations proceeding successfully, Jang Woo-jin reported. Multiple civilizations have been contacted and offered integration. Universal expansion protocols are being implemented according to plan. The humans were extending their influence beyond the boundaries of space itself. Captain Shin Minji was establishing communication networks that connected not just different locations in space, but different points in time. The humans had developed the ability to coordinate with past and future versions of galactic civilization, creating a temporal empire that spanned all of history. The galaxy was becoming a single entity that existed across all time, with humanity serving as the coordinating intelligence that maintained continuity and direction across temporal boundaries. Temporal coordination networks operational, Shin Minji reported. Cross-time communication established with past and future civilizations. We are achieving continuity across all temporal boundaries. The humans had conquered time itself. Veltar completed his final report on humanity with a growing sense of awe and terror. His observations had recorded the emergence of a species that had transcended every limitation that had previously defined intelligent life. The humans had not simply won a war, they had redesigned the fundamental nature of existence. But most disturbing was Veltar's realization that this transformation had been inevitable from the moment humanity had first encountered opposition. The war with the hegemony had not created human capabilities, it had simply revealed them. The humans had always possessed the potential to reshape the galaxy. They had simply needed an excuse to demonstrate their abilities. Captain Lee Dong-yun's final transmission was sent to every being in the galaxy simultaneously, delivered through consciousness integration networks that ensured perfect understanding regardless of species or language barriers. To all members of galactic civilization, integration complete. The galaxy is now a